The war in Lebanon has rather taken the spotlight off Gaza, but there's a report this afternoon from Associated Press that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, is considering a plan to cut off all food and all water supplies from an area of northern Gaza, including Gaza City. The idea is apparently to starve out Hamas terrorists, but the plan, of course, risks depriving hundreds of thousands of people living there of food and water. Let's talk now to James Elder, an aid worker for UNICEF, who's recently returned from the area. James, very good to have you on the show. We don't know whether this plan is going to be implemented yet. It came to Netanyahu, apparently, from a group of retired Israeli generals, and they want to create an entire occupied military area in which anybody else will be considered a combatant. Is this a major step up? If they went ahead with this, what would be the implications for that part of Gaza?
Well, in some ways, this is happening. I mean, without knowing the specifics of what those recommendations are, Andrew, the North has seen 3 forced evacuation orders in the last 5 days, the 7th, 9th and the 12th of October, at the same time when there's been a complete escalation of attacks. We see the Office for the High Commission of Human Rights reporting about people fleeing and being shot, people at food centres being shot. We know that water points are no longer accessible, the bakeries are closed, that no food aid has got into the north in the entirety of October, that commercial trucks, which were the lifeline for all of Gaza, we were in the hundreds of commercial trucks when we were having these debates months ago, that's down to 0 currently in Gaza. So there is a forcible push of people out. Unfortunately, A, it's under fire, and B, Andrew, those people know that the south of Gaza is pretty much unlivable when it comes to sanitation and access to services, and also places in the south, as we saw at the attack at the hospital overnight, they too get bombed.
So we can understand, I think, what the IDF are trying to do militarily, that they want to eradicate Hamas completely. But do you think that there is a political agenda here, that they want to take control of a large chunk of Gaza and never hand it back to anybody?
I just don't know. I can't speak to the politics, Andrew. I can't speak to their intent. I can certainly speak to a casualty rate of children that absolutely numerically speaks to a complete disregard for civilians throughout this war. If you're now looking at 40 children, 40 girls and boys killed on average every day for a year, not a week, not a month, for a year. So as hard as it is to imagine, as someone who's come and gone through Gaza 4 times over the last year, we do all of a sudden see like we're hitting a worst case scenario. No constraints, no limits, an escalation in attacks on areas that the occupying force Israel declare as safe zones, and a massive decrease in the amount of aid getting to people.
We both know that in the modern world, people get kind of bored of stories. You have been there. Just explain to people, describe to people listening what it looks like and feels like in those parts of Gaza you've been in.
I think a couple of things, Andrew. One is hospitals. I spend a lot of time in hospitals, and so I have spent more time than I ever imagined watching children die in hospitals, seeing children have amputations that shouldn't have to occur, but because the hospital doesn't have what it needs. Far too many times watching parents cry as a child dies in their arms. I've come to learn, Andrew, that there's such a thing as 4th-degree burns. I didn't know that existed. So that's in the hospitals, and that's one of those hospitals is the complex that was struck overnight. And then civilians on the ground, 85%, so more than 3/4 of the Gaza Strip is now under some type of evacuation order. So what was already one of the most crowded places on the planet, now, no matter how hard people try to keep clean, to keep sanitized, to find something for their children, they are crammed into utterly unlivable places, whilst we've seen a devastation of water systems, of health services, systematically so. So I see families, Andrew, that literally invite other families into their tents, not homes anymore, they've been bombed, into their tents because they know that family's left a destroyed home, but they have nothing. So we see skin diseases. We know 9 out of 10 children don't get enough food. I see scores of children, Andrew, in hospitals when I was there last week, scores and scores who need medical evacuation. Very, very clearly. A little 12-year-old girl who will die, who's almost her face was removed. There is no consistency to why they are not allowed to leave, apart from the only consistent thing is inconsistency.